Remembrance Sunday, the remembering that just a few moments ago, peace was established 100 years ago, to the day, to the month, to the minute. It's poignant, isn't it? Very significant. The First World War was meant to be the war to end all wars. That's what they said 100 years ago. The First World War was the war to end all wars. And in that war, more than 70 million military personnel were involved across the world. Most of them were in Europe. In all, 9 million military died, and 750,000 British troops died. In France, nearly 6,000 miles of trenches from the North Sea down to the Swiss border with France, knee-deep in mud. Soldiers spent years there, knee-deep in mud, infested by lice and rats. This was the first war to see huge machine guns, tanks and aircraft making mass killing on a scale the world had never seen before. And on the 1st of July 1916, the British troops endured the bloodiest day in our history when 19,000 British troops died on the very first day of the Battle of the Somme. So, how did it start? Where did it all come from? Well, in 1914, Europe was mainly divided into two great superpowers, two triple alliances. We had in green, we had Britain, France and Russia, and then in orange, we've got Germany, Austro-Hungary and Bosnia and Italy, making essentially two triple alliances. And the war was triggered on the 28th of June 1914 when Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated. He was the heir to the throne, to the Austro-Hungarian throne, and he was assassinated by a member of radical terrorists from Serbia. What did the Austro-Hungarians do when their crown prince was assassinated? Well, they started bombing Belgrade in Serbia. The Austro-Hungarians started bombing Belgrade in Serbia. Therefore, all the peace treaties started coming into action. When Belgrade was bombed, then the Russians stepped in to help the Serbs. And so Germany declared war on the Russians. And then France declared war on Germany, so Germany invaded Belgium on the way into France. And when France was invaded, Britain declared war on Germany. It was kind of a whole series of dominoes that fell together, one after another, because of one incident. Everyone believed, and the war for Britain started on the 4th of August 1914. Everybody believed it would be over by Christmas. But instead of 4 months, it lasted 4 dreadful, dreadful years. Let me tell you about one particular soldier. He's a Canadian soldier called John McCrae. As we'll see, on August the 4th, 1914, when Britain declared war on Germany, it wasn't just Britain alone, it was the entire British Empire. Because of the treaties that we had in the Commonwealth, the entire British Commonwealth declared war on Germany. And so Canada was immediately drawn into the war. And its citizens from all over the land enlisted. And within 3 weeks, 45,000 Canadians had volunteered and joined up. As a qualified doctor, John McCrae was among them. He was appointed a medical officer with the Canadian Field Artillery, and he had the rank of major, and he was second in command. Before he left Canada, he wrote this letter to his friend. He said, "It is a terrible state of affairs." That's the one. "It's a terrible state of affairs, and I'm going because I think every bachelor, especially if he has experience of war, ought to go. I'm really rather afraid. but I'm more afraid to stay at home with my conscience. And so off to France John McCrae went. By April 1915, John was in the trenches at Ypres in Belgium, and he saw some of the heaviest fighting in the war there. In the trenches, John tended, as a doctor, he tended to hundreds of soldiers every day. He was surrounded by death and dying. He wrote this letter to his mother. "The general impression is my mind is of a nightmare. We have been in the most bitter of fights for 17 days and 17 nights. None of us have had our clothes off, not even our boots, even except occasionally. In all that time while I was awake, gunfire and rifle fire never ceased for 60 seconds. And behind it was all the constant background of the sights of the dead, the wounded, the maimed, and a terrible anxiety lest the line should give way." In 1916, John McCrae was transferred to a military hospital where he helped care for 1,500 wounded comrades. Here, many wounded from the dreadful Battle of the Somme were brought. By the summer of 1917, John suffered some very severe attacks of asthma, something he'd suffered all his life. He had very severe asthma attacks, and this developed into pneumonia, and so he was admitted into the hospital where he worked himself as a doctor, and he died 5 days later. He's buried with full military honours. His death was met with great grief from his friends and comrades. But before he died, he wrote a poem. A poem which has been translated into many languages. A poem that mentions the symbol that many of us are wearing today, the poppy, because it was John McCrae who wrote the poem in Flanders Field. He wrote, "In Flanders Field the poppies blow between the crosses, row on row, that mark our place, and in the sky the larks still bravely singing fly, scarce heard amid the guns below. We are the dead. Short days ago we lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders Field. Take up your quarrel with the foe. To you from failing hands we throw the torch, be yours to hold it high. If you break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders Field." Moving forward towards the end of the war, on August the 4th, 1918, exactly 4 years to the day from when Britain declared war on Germany, on August the 4th, 1918, King George V of England called for a national day of prayer. The whole country came together and prayed for God to intervene, that there would be peace in this land, peace in Europe. And 100 days later was November the 11th, and the guns stopped, because we serve a God who hears the cries of his people's hearts. That month, August 1918, the Allied troops pushed forward on the Western Front through the Second Battle of the Somme and the Battle of Amiens in France. At last, the Germans were pushed out of France and were retreating back into Germany. By October, the German troops were utterly exhausted and demoralised. Their families back home in Germany were starving. And then the people rose up and insisted that Kaiser Wilhelm II should abdicate. And when he abdicated, then everything was lost by the German people. And so they asked for an armistice. The Allies drew up terms of the peace, and I'm told that it was the Germans went in saying, these are our terms. And the British and the French replied, you have no terms to offer. So they drew up the terms of peace, and it was signed in a railway dining carriage in the forest of Compiègne, 37 miles north of Paris, stating that the hostilities were to cease at 11 o'clock on the 11th of November 1918. Exactly 100 years ago from this morning. This is a painting depicting the signatories of the armistice in the railway carriage. The German standing in front, there should be a red dot here, the German standing in front in the centre of the picture, he is Matthias Esberger, head of the German delegation. Sitting at the table, the two across to your right, no, to your left, my right, are the two British naval officers, Rear Admiral George Hope, First Sea Lord Admiral, and Sir Rosalind Wimes. For the French, standing up behind the table, he is the Marshal Ferdinand Foch. And so the peace treaty was signed. There was peace in Europe at last. And of course, there were great celebrations at home. This is Trafalgar Square. Great celebrations at home. But of course, the celebrations were tinged by the bitter grief that everybody bore, having lost so many of our brave troops. The following year, 1919, King George requested a 2-minute silence across the land for contemplation, reflection, and respect for those who died to pay the ultimate price of peace. This is Oxford Street in London, observing the very first 2-minute silence in 1918, and the custom that we rightly continue to this day. Peace is so costly, isn't it? Peace is so costly. Between 1914 and 1918, peace cost the lives of 16 million military and civilian personnel. Forgive me. I'll use this one. Forgive me for reminding you, as if you couldn't forget. If you went shopping yesterday, you'll know that it's nearly Christmas. I've said it. I've said that word. When Christmas comes and the first cards start to arrive, and the very first one comes, oh no, and you put it up, and within a few days you're getting dozens and dozens, and so many of them are talking about peace on earth and goodwill to men. So many Christmas cards are talking about peace on earth and goodwill to men. That's what we long for at Christmas time. But despite what we long for in our hearts, peace just seems to elude us, doesn't it? Peace always seems to elude us. World War I, described as the war to end all wars. But you know what? Since then, things have got worse, not better. Out of the 162 nations in the world today, would you believe 151 are involved in some kind of conflict? There are only a handful of countries not engaged in any kind of conflict. Looking at the map, you can see Iceland at the top is grey, and there's a couple in Europe like Denmark and Austria. But most of the world is engaged in some kind of military conflict today. Somehow, despite the deepest yearnings of our heart, peace always seems to elude us. Well, 2,000 years ago, there was a messenger from heaven who promised peace on earth. In the Bible, in John chapter 14, the Lord Jesus said, "Peace I leave you, my peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled and do not be afraid. I give you peace. Jesus said, I give you my peace. And when Jesus gives his peace, then it's real peace. It's real peace. Peace, we would say, if we were a nation at peace, then we would say that's an absence of war. But in the Bible, peace means so much more than just an absence of war. It means wholeness and completeness and security in your heart, enjoying the riches of all of God's blessing. That's what peace, that when Jesus talked. In the world, peace is something that you have to work hard at. But with God, it's a wonderful gift that he gives. It's a free gift that God gives to those who receive by faith in Jesus, for those who love him. It's a free gift. See, the problem is we are all at war. We are all at odds with the God who made you. You're at odds with the God who made you. The truth is, we're all a bit more selfish than we'd like to be, aren't we? We all say things and do things that we're ashamed of, and oh, I've done it again, you idiot. Our selfishness hurts ourselves, it hurts our families, and it hurts our friends, and consequently that selfishness hurts God. It's an offence to God. So what can we do to get right with God? Well, by ourselves, nothing. By ourselves we can't do anything to get right with God. Which is why Jesus came on a rescue mission. He came to save us by going to the cross. Jesus came specifically to die on the cross in your place, so taking all the punishment from God so that you wouldn't have to. Jesus, as the perfect man, he never hurt his friends, he never hurt his family, he never offended God. So he was, as the perfect man, he was able to go to the cross in your place and take the punishment for your selfishness. So by believing in Jesus, we can be right with God forevermore. And it'll last for all of eternity. This is the peace that the world craves for. This is the peace that your heart craves for. To be at peace with the God who made you. If you will put your trust in this Jesus, then you can be at peace with God forevermore. Do it today. Do it today, folks, because your heart is yearning for this peace with Almighty God. Maybe you might want to investigate the claims of the Bible and see if there is a God, and find out more about this Jesus whom he sent. Well, if you want to investigate Christianity, then our church regularly runs a course called Christianity Explored. It's a free course, and will investigate why Jesus came and what it means to follow him. Everybody's welcome. You don't have to know anything about the Bible. You won't be asked to read aloud. You won't be asked to pray or sing. And you can ask any questions you want, or you can simply listen to hear more about Jesus. It's a super course, and I highly recommend it. Come and have a word with me later if you fancy that. It's a free course. We can do it here on Oakwood, maybe even in your home if that helps with babysitting. We'll be very willing to come to your house and run it then. What we're going to do now, thank you for listening, we're going to pray. We're going to pray.